I actually learned about a couple months prior to the launch that none of the crew members on this mission had ever scrubbed a launch. So as we left the ONC building, I guess we had two thoughts. One was we're either on a really good streak and we're going to launch tonight, or we've used up most of our good luck.
As it turned out, it was an absolutely gorgeous night. They say that you could see the launch all the way up to New York City. It was so clear that night. But the main engine's light, and we take the second heaviest payload ever into orbit aboard the shuttle at 35,000 pounds, as was mentioned earlier. This is a view inside, and then you'll have a view outside the shuttle of what it looked like. And if you look in the foreground, you can see all the fish jumping out of the water. I guess they were happy to see us go as well. Into the roll program, and then about, this is the business end of the jet, actually, and if you look, you can see the body flap moving back and forth a little bit. And 2 minutes into the flight, we get rid of the SRBs. This is what it looked like from the inside. And we're on our way to 17,500 miles per hour as we begin the chase of the station.
Once we were on orbit, we had to convert this rocket ship into our home and workplace. And part of that involved preparing our suits for the launch, or for the EVAs.
Well, the first critical task we had once we were on orbit was to get, obviously, rendezvoused and docked to the station. There you see a terrific view of the shuttle as it approaches in the P6 in the payload bay. You can see it occupies almost the entire bay. That's our docking port on the station. I was a little bit concerned about the offsets in the CGs and the capture performance once we actually made contact. You can see that, unfortunately, a lot of the good things that happen on orbit tend to happen at night, and that is actually sunset on the station. The view you have now, you just saw, was the centerline target that we use to align the orbiter and do the final approach. That is the station docking mechanism on the top and the shuttle mechanism below, and you'll see that scene again here in a second. There's the final view of the centerline target as we get very close. And we'll go back to the outside here in a second. And you can see we're closing fairly slowly, only at about 1/10 of a foot per second. I have to admit I was very anxious about this moment. The potential for failure in the mission was great if we did not dock. So we were pretty excited on the flight deck once it happened. It took a couple minutes to get the hooks driven, and then after that, we were all happy to have this part of the mission behind us.
Well, there we are on the station. You can see it at the moment. The modules all lined up, the Unity and FGB and Zvezda, and at the very back, the Soyuz vehicle. Very shortly after docking, we had to start the arm up so that we could take the P6 out of the bay, and you can see it being taken out of the bay. And we're going to park it high above the cargo bay so that it's in a friendly thermal position, and it's a fairly big object, so with 45 feet and weighing about 35,000 pounds, we had to do it very carefully, and there it is in the overnight park position. And the following morning, I took it and positioned it about 3 feet above the Z1 structure where you see it in this picture.
It's a pretty tight fit getting into the suit, and as a matter of fact, it's a pretty tight fit in the airlock as well. And Brent and Mark did a fantastic job getting us in. It's a real team effort. There's plenty of room outside, though, and here Carlos and I are on our way to work. This is the first flight of the wireless video system, the helmet cam, that gives you this absolutely fantastic view of P6 as Mark brings it down. The motion is slow, but you might be able to see a little bit of it there. We're verifying alignment. Mark drives it down close enough, within a couple inches, for Carlos to drive the capture latch to engage the Rocketdyne truss attachment system, and then we drive 4 bolts to hold P6 and Z1 together.
Once P6 was mated onto Z1, Mark relinquished control of the arm to Mike, and the first thing I did was jump on a portable foot restraint and connect connectors between the Z1 and the P6. This would allow power to flow from P6 to the station as well as data, and allow us to command it. Meanwhile, Joe was up high removing these launch restraints that protected the blanket boxes during the launch environment, the high Gs and the vibrations. That would allow me to rotate out the beta gimbal, and Joe did another one later. Fortunately, this happened at night, so this is a view out of our night camera, the B camera. It was supposed to swing out on its own on a spring, but things don't always work as expected, and I had to do a lot of pushing, as did Joe on his mast when it swung out. Once it was completely out, I crawled out onto the end of the mast tip fitting and swung out the blanket boxes. Each box weighed about 800 pounds, but it was just fingertip pressure to make it go all the way out. At that point, I'm about 100 feet from the bottom of the payload bay of the orbiter.
Well, with Joe and Carlos complete with their task and the ground complete with its activation task, it was time to deploy the first array. We actually commanded that sequence to start from on board the shuttle on the aft flight deck. And you can see the mast come out of the canister, and it's amazing that over 100 feet of mast is folded up into that canister, as well as the solar array blankets.
We had a great view from outside, and the still pictures that we took are absolutely fantastic. Some of the panels stuck together, and they would eventually release themselves, but as they did, you could see the dynamics in the array. They got more and more dynamic to the point where finally, at this release here on the left box in your picture, the subsequent crashing down, if you will, was enough to cause both tension lines on both tension reels, and here it is right there, to come off of the tension reel. You can see the resultant motion in the blanket box, or the blankets. Pretty dynamic. Well, after a hard day of work on top of P6, the translation home and the view was just absolutely fantastic. We followed the handrail highway that they provided for us all the way down to the orbiter, to the airlock. And it wasn't until we got on the side of the node that we could actually see the orbiter windows.
Well, at the end of EVA-1, we had the starboard solar array deployed, not tensioned because of the problem with the tension cable. But the ground worked very hard overnight to give us a new procedure to deploy the port array, and this is the port array being deployed. You can see the same sticking phenomena in the blankets. However, what we did on this deploy was start and stop the mast about every 8 feet to minimize that problem. And there is sunset on the array, and you can see the spectacular colors that we were able to see on orbit.
It's a good picture to give you an idea of the size of the station now. From tip to tip on the solar arrays, it's about the length of a football field. You can see Joe here traversing across the bottom part of the node, and then you got the shuttle arm up the left side. It truly is a magnificent view, and it's incredibly large now.
This is another example of moving to your work site, trying real hard not to be distracted by the view. The helmet cam really gave you an idea, and gives you an idea of what it is like to be EVA. These are the DDCU cold plates that are used to regulate the temperature inside the DDCU, but they also make great mirrors, and you can see Carlos just turned on his helmet light in the reflection, and my reflection is in the lower right corner. We use the pistol grip tool in many of our tasks, and in this case we're loosening the SASA beta gimbal bolts, and you can also see the Endeavor and Unity and the rest of the station in the background there.
The docking adapter you see will have to be moved on the next mission so they can install the lab. In order to do that, we disconnected many umbilical cables between the node and PMA2, as it's called. We also released cinch bolts off 2 of the 3 radiators that were on P6. Here you can see my reflection in a radiator. These bolts had to be removed before the cinch could be deployed. And here you see a deployment of a radiator following EVA-2.
The first task we had to do on EVA Day 3 was repair the starboard solar array blanket box tension problem. And the ground team just did a fantastic job of developing a procedure for Carlos and me to follow. And here Carlos is guiding the cable in with the tool while I control the rate of the reel rotation.
A lot of people had worried about how hard it would be to do this, so we had a little anxiety as to how it was going to go, but we were very happy to see it work the first time, and there's our enthusiastic response right there. We also had to tear some things apart to be able to get to our work sites. Here we had to remove a panel off the side of the node so that we could install an antenna cable that we would be using with the floating potential probe. So I was hard at work there in this scene.
And Carlos was working so hard that I felt it was time to take a little time off, and I'm waving at the crew inside the crew module, and then enjoying the absolutely fantastic view of the Andes Mountains and Argentina as we went over. The final task we had was to install the floating potential probe on the top of P6, complete with a topping out evergreen tree and a short topping out ceremony.
This scene is kind of sad for me, and Joe will recognize it. It's the view from the top of P6 looking down at the Earth and Endeavour. This was one of the high points that we get, but it was also towards the end of all the work that we had done outside. By the time we finished the third EVA, we had the arrays deployed, the radiators were out, we could flow electricity and cool the station.
Well, it was finally time to go say hello to the station crew. The hatch you see being open there is the hatch between PMA 3 and the node, and that's the shuttle crew actually floating into the station. Shep, Yuri, and Sergey welcomed us aboard very warmly, and Shep, being a Navy captain, observed the Navy custom of ringing the bell as we floated in. After just a quick picture in the node, we actually took the station crew into the shuttle flight deck. We're back in the shuttle flight deck now, so they could get a good look at the P6, their new power module, which they would be managing over the next several months. And that's the view that they saw out the overhead window.
Well, after this, all of us were going to head down into the service module so we could all get together and plan the next 24 hours because we had a lot of work to do. And here you see Sergey beckoning us through the FGB, and we're on our way into the service module that you see in the distance. And the FGB is basically a place where they store a lot of things, and now we're coming into the transfer module, and you can see the service module with Yuri and Sergey already there. And this is basically the heart of the station at this point in time, and we're going to take a little trip into what we call the stateroom, or one of the staterooms, which is where the crew basically have their sleeping compartment. And so this is one of them. It's not much bigger than a closet, but very, very comfortable. And very good about it is the fact that they have a window, and you can see some solar rays there, both from P6 and as well as the Russian modules. And of course, we had a meal together before we set out to work, and had some Russian food as well as some orbiter food.
Well, all too quickly, it was time for us to leave. We had the hatches open just a little more than 24 hours. We accomplished a great deal, and as we left, Shep again observed the tradition of ringing the bell on the quarterdeck as the crew departed. That's the final hatch closure, and we were getting ready for undocking.
Due to the great work of Lonnie Schmidt and his folks, we had enough propellant left where we could actually do the fly around of the International Space Station. And like the docking was at night, the undocking was also at night. And we used a couple of small springs on the docking mechanism to push the two vehicles apart. And then once we got a couple feet apart, we fired the thrusters to increase the rate of separation. It was interesting. Looking up at the arrays, you could actually see the arrays ripple as we had fired those thrusters. It was a team effort to do the fly around. I was actually at the controls, and Brent was backing me up. Carlos had the handheld laser, and he was taking the shots to tell me the range. And then Mark and Joe were firing as many pictures as they could. It took us 45 minutes to do a complete fly around. Really incredible pictures. When you're up in space, most of the man-made things you see in space are white or black or silver or gray, pretty mundane colors. But with the huge solar arrays out now, he now added this very brilliant gold, sometimes orange, depending on how the sunlight hit the arrays, and it was a very pretty sight. Let you enjoy the view here for a second.
Well, we were getting near the end of our mission, and here's our empty cargo bay. We were sure glad that it was empty, and like every crew before coming back, we have to shoot a few scenes to show everybody that we really were in weightlessness. And this is a knob that we spun off our exercise bicycle, and behind it you can see a black vent, and the air is actually blowing it away, and it's just going to keep going until it bumps into something.
Well, we did get hungry while we were up there. So we had to eat M&Ms for 10 days.
And of course we also had to drink as well, although we usually used a straw.
Eating in space is always a great adventure. You do have to pay a little more attention to where your utensils are, however. This picture or view doesn't do justice to the northern lights, but I hope you get the point. It was a beautiful sight. And something you don't normally see from space, a meteor entering the atmosphere from above.
Unfortunately, this picture here doesn't show you the true beauty of what we were able to see with our naked eyeballs. Every 45 minutes we get to see a sunrise and a sunset. It's just absolutely fabulous. But after all the fun, we had to get the two important people ready to do a couple hours worth of hard work and got them in their launch and entry suits for all the work they'd be doing to get us home safely.
It's really important when you're preparing for the deorbit burn that you secure everything that's been floating around the shuttle for about 11 days. Everything was pretty secure on the flight deck, as you can see. Joe did everything in the mid deck pretty well, except for one camera. You know, I confessed a little bit earlier to being somewhat nervous or anxious about the rendezvous. I was not nervous or anxious at all about the landing. You point the nose of the orbiter down, you're going to land. And this is the view of the through the pilot's HUD, and you can see we're shooting to land just about at the start of those lights, the centerline lights of the runway. It's pretty amazing. You start this process over Australia, and you're able to touch down within 100 feet or so of your desired point. So that's pretty impressive. It's a great testament to the technology of the shuttle. After we were on the ground, Mike deployed the drag chute to help slow us down. We derotated to get the nose on the ground, and the next big task for me was to stop with the nose tire directly on the centerline lights. It took us about an hour or so to get out of the vehicle. We had some things to do, and that's a pretty interesting shot of the crew working afterwards. And then we had a chance to get out and thank the folks at KSC for giving us a great vehicle.
And we're on our way to 17,500 miles per hour as we begin the chase of the station.
Once we were in orbit, we had to convert this rocket ship into our home and workplace. And part of that involved preparing our suits for the launch, or for the EVAs.
Well, the first critical task we had once we were in orbit was to get that we used to align the orbiter and do the final approach. That is the station docking mechanism on the top and the shuttle mechanism below. And you'll see that scene again here in a second. There's the final view of the centerline target as we get very close. And we'll go back to the outside here in a second. And you can see we're closing fairly slowly, only at about 1/10 of a foot per second. I have to admit I was very anxious about this moment, the potential for failure
into orbit aboard the shuttle at 35,000 pounds, it was mentioned earlier. This is a view inside, and then you'll have a view outside the shuttle of what it looked like. And if you look in the foreground, you can see all the fish jumping out of the water. I guess they were happy to see us go as well. Into the roll program, and then about, this is the business end of the jet, actually, and if you look, you can see the body flap moving back and forth a little bit. And 2 minutes into the flight, we get rid of the SRBs. This is what it looked like from the inside.
Obviously rendezvoused and docked to the station. There you see a terrific view of the shuttle as it approaches in the P6 in the payload bay. You can see it occupies almost the entire bay. That's our docking port on the station. I was a little bit concerned about the offsets in the CGs and the capture performance once we actually made contact. You can see that, unfortunately, a lot of the good things that happen on orbit tend to happen at night, and that is actually sunset on the station. The view you have now, you just saw, was the centerline target. I actually learned about a couple months prior to the launch that none of the crew members on this mission had ever scrubbed a launch. So as we left the ONC building, I guess we had two thoughts. One was we're either on a really good streak and we're going to launch tonight, or we've used up most of our good luck.
As it turned out, it was an absolutely gorgeous night. They say that you could see the launch all the way up to New York City. It was so clear that night. But the main engine's light, and we take the second heaviest payload ever.